really good, solid, clear communications. And what I tend to say to the teams is that, look, this is your business. You sort your business out. Let me sort the communication side out. And sorting the business out is hugely, hugely important, but not at the expense of clear communications, both internally, making sure that all of your team are on board, know exactly what you're doing, but externally as well. Very often that will be through digital marketing channels, through social media, through the good old press, local TV, radio, and of course national publicity sometimes if it is a major issue. You know, Eastbourne Pier, that kind of went pretty much global. And then it's a question of just trying to keep slightly ahead of the game by anticipating what the next move will be. And so, but the communications is really important. One question I'm often asked is it okay to lie? And some of you may be laughing at it, I think what a daft question, and I would agree with you. And my answer is always, if nobody, and I mean nobody, is ever going to find out that you've told a lie, okay. Otherwise, just be as honest as you possibly can, because people in the longer term will appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for that, Tim. I remember many years ago when I was doing my master's, I did the case study of Tylenol versus Perrier, which was all about that, around the communication and being caught hiding the facts afterwards. Just it took them many more years to recover on a similar scale issue. So yeah, I think being honest and upfront is absolutely key. With some questions coming in there, and please keep them coming. Maybe I'll just start with a few to get the ball rolling, and maybe come back to you, Peter, and cast your mind back to I think anyone over 30, one of the times of life is we all remember where we were and what we were doing when we heard a plane had gone into the Twin Towers in New York on 9/11. You were running a large fleet of aircraft in the Americas, and presumably you got a call to say something had happened. What happened next?
Well, I remember it very specifically. We were going through a budget presentation. I had my South American manager, and my secretary came in and said that a plane had just got into the World Trade Center, and I think everyone in the world who heard that message at that time, including the president, thought it may be a light aircraft. She came in 20 minutes later and said another one had got in. So clearly something was happening, and I've changed ever since. There was two issues. One, obviously, your operational kicked in, and as a manager over many years, I've never given people the benefit of the doubt when I've taken on people. I've always made sure that, particularly in my industry, that the people who are managing those processes are the right people. And sure enough, we had a plan, not necessarily specifically for that, but certainly we're well trained in terms of accidents and incidents that we've all experienced during our life. The Operational Control Center of DHL, which was a company at the time, we had 234 aircraft in the United States, of which at that time I think about 30 were airborne. We were obviously commanded by the US authorities to land our aircraft as quickly as possible, and the Operational Control Center just kicked in. I mean, it became second nature to them to get those aircraft, admittedly with thousands of other aircraft into various airfields. So the operational side of that crisis was managed effectively. The issue that followed that within seconds was that I had mostly United States employees, and in the office in Fort Lauderdale, we had about 400 and 10,000 around the rest of the international Americas. This for them, the morale was obviously off the scale. They'd never witnessed this type of incident. None of us had, but at least those in Europe and other parts of the world had some of the experience of explosions and terrorist attacks. For the people living in the States, this was effectively brand new for them. So morale was exceptionally low. So certainly one of the things I had to do very quickly within an hour was to set up a series of meetings inside the office to explain to my colleagues there that this was terrible news, And there's no way you can, I can't even remember the words I said now. Certainly, I had to quieten down and give some level of confidence. And that was why I said earlier, one has to communicate, not just talk. So I was very conscious of the words that I used and very specific in terms of trying to give some semblance of order. And at that point, you do have to become somewhat autocratic. So I was quite comfortable that the operation was under control. I had the right people in the right place managing that process. Most of my time later that day and for a few days and weeks after that was about morale, about providing levels of confidence to make sure that we were maintaining our focus on terms of what was important for them as individuals, being members of a society that had gone through a massive trauma, but at the same time, life has to go on. So there are many things I learned in those couple of days. I mean, one of the things I did very quickly, for example, the following day, I think, was to have a mass meeting, and I simply got a US flag and a UK flag and put them on the table, and that just, I mean, I just thought of that, and that number of people came up to me and said that was demonstrating we were linked together, we were uniform in the way in which we approach. So a lot of it is emotion, a lot of it is giving confidence, being autocratic, and maintaining that balance so that people have confidence that they can see through the current problem, they can see through the rubble and the smoke, and that there's something at the end of it. So it was an experience that I vividly remember to this day, almost nearly every second. But everyone came through that, and DHL, like a lot of other airlines, succeeded. But the impact on the staff was the most important thing in managing that crisis. I imagine today there must be huge amounts of worried people, employees, thinking, what on earth is going to happen? So I think managers, owners have a huge responsibility in communicating that passion, that desire to at least create a level of some confidence and comfort that we'll see this through. You've gone quiet, Nigel.
You're on mute, Nigel.
Yeah, sorry, I got it now. I'll learn this eventually. And maybe just to follow up from that, Tim, in terms of that whole communication piece internally to staff was, I can't imagine many companies had a crisis management communications plan for a pandemic in a top drawer they just pulled out. So how do people learn this as they go?
I think you're right. I think there is no manual that prepares you for anything like that. Going back to the Twin Towers issue, by bizarre coincidence, I was participating in the New York Marathon, and that was about a month later. I think that was October, and there was huge talk about it being cancelled. In the end, they let it go ahead because the mayor of New York, Giuliani, if I'm not mistaken, decided that he wanted to show that New York, Manhattan was not closed, and it was still going, and it was resolute, and some great messages that were sent out. And after that, I went over to see the International Red Cross, who were actually coordinating a lot of the communications around Twin Towers, and that was a fascinating few days I spent with them. And the key task for them was very much about trying to keep up with the amount of media interest when you've got about 100 TV crews based on your doorstep, trying to manage the flow of news, trying not to give in to individual requests for a quick interview on this, a quick interview on that, but actually taking ownership of the news feed so that you're giving out the information that you want to give out. And with our current pandemic, I think it's a similar thing. I think it's taking ownership of the issues that you are facing, not shying away from them, and talking to your team about it. I imagine some of the slightly larger SMEs may have well furloughed some of your team. I have done that. I furloughed a few members of my team, but we've not blocked them off. So they're still very much part of the team meetings. While of course we're listening to the government regulations about making sure they're not doing any work, we just felt it was important that they felt they knew what was going on. So that's one element perhaps of the internal communications. And the other, again, I come back to the honesty. I think wherever you can, just try to give your team as up-to-date information as you possibly can. There are some areas that maybe you won't want to touch upon because they're too delicate, or you're still trying to get your head around it yourself, and that's fine, that's understandable. But as soon as you have plans, proper plans, talk to the people. One of the most difficult things that I've done is to saying to a couple of members of staff that I was going to furlough you. And the reaction was absolutely brilliant. It was so good. And so it went from very stressful potential meetings to meetings of complete understanding by my team, and a couple of comments about, we're surprised you didn't do this actually last week. And so I think you will find that once you get your communications in order and you start talking about things, it'll ease you up. Your stress levels will start to come down. Now, I'm not saying every member of the team reacts well to bad news, but I think we're sometimes surprised by how people do react, but in a positive way.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And Gary, I was just going to ask you then, just to kind of my final question and there's some coming in now from the attendees, so I'll jump on them in a second. And I appreciate for Bright Horizons are in a closed period, so you can't talk too much about your specific numbers right now. But to me, one of the challenges with this crisis is, and when we look at 9/11, and I know you were managing Compass Italy during the Eurozone crisis and for the banking crisis, but to my mind, they were all kind of single issues. We knew what the problem was, and we knew some way it would be fixed and we'd be able to get through it. This particular crisis is, multifaceted. It's, society is shut down, consumer demand is shut down, banks are shut down, everything is shut down. How does the approach in this crisis differ from ones that are much more easy to contain?
I think you're right. This one is just unprecedented, and whilst we thought the Eurozone crisis was the biggest one and Lehman was another, actually this is much bigger and deeper, and in fact impacts so many parts of society and business. It is very, very different facets to it. I think what I would sort of suggest though is the approach has got to be similar, because it's a crisis. Whether it's one with 10 arms and legs or 2, it's still a crisis. So I think that real focus we talked about earlier, which is keeping it simple, move quickly, be agile and decisive, focus on what the key things are, applies whatever the crisis is. Having said that, there is a slight difference this time. I think with COVID, when you look at what the UK government has done, that's pretty unprecedented in terms of supporting us through this difficult crisis. So those fundamentals I talked about are the same under any crisis. However, I think everybody's having to adapt their skill set to understand the support that is coming from the government. And you've got to really try and take, or we've got to try and take the best use of that. Furlough is something we've not seen before. The government basically giving people a 12 months holiday on rates, suggesting to landlords about extending rents, government loans for small and medium-sized businesses at 0 interest rates, mortgage holidays. All of these things are tools that we probably have not seen in different crises before. I think the approach to living through it and having the discipline of the crisis is exactly the same, but really looking to furlough and all of the options and schemes that the government are presenting to keep small, medium and large businesses going forward and keep people out of redundancy situation. I think that's one of the big changes or differences in this crisis versus others that I've seen before.
Great, okay, thanks. I think we'll touch back later to the sort of some of these government schemes, but I just want to take a few of the questions coming in from the attendees. And the first one there is from David Williams for you, Peter. And David wants to know if you could expand a bit more on your comment, look, not see.
Well, I think it's too easy just to scope over and not recognise what's going on. We tend to become focused in our own level of understanding without realising. I'm talking specifically here from a staff point of view. and from a customer. Now, the customer obviously you can't see, but certainly the look on people's faces and the way in which they demonstrate their emotions becoming critically important. I think now is not the time to scan. You really have to understand how people are trying to cope with what for many will be a traumatic experience. For others, it's simply just a way of life, and we'll somehow get through it. But I think you've got to look and understand what you see through your eyes, not just see something. And I think there's a nuance there where it's in line with people that everyone can talk but not often communicate. You can often, you'll hear everything, but you're not listening to what's being said. And particularly when you have two people conversing, the person who's listening to you actually is not listening. They're waiting to compile how they're going to come back to you. So I think it's that emotive nuance is what I'm referring to. Look at something and not just see something.
Great, thanks, Peter. Gary, one perhaps for you, come in here from Nick that says, calculated cash flow is a challenge, particularly with receipts. I expect a lot of our 1,400 customers or so will choose to extend their credit or hold off paying their February, March invoices during the uncertainty. So what are your views on how you can plan cash flow with such uncertainty?
Yeah, I think there are other questions linked to this, which is, how we behave through this crisis is not just about, our business today, but it's the business of the future. So whilst it's difficult, we have to behave for the longer term, which makes it quite difficult when you start to have conversations about cash flow. All of us find it difficult to be chasing customers and clients to collect debt related to services that are being provided before. But we've just got to remember the whole world's in this situation. So I think manage it delicately, but I would not recommend just switching it off and avoiding it until the COVID crisis is over. Everybody understands it. I think, those services have been provided. It's sensible to keep chasing. But I think that cannot be a strategy on its own. You've got to look at reducing your cost base as well as recovery. And, government furlough schemes, switching off variable cost is all part of the puzzle of managing your cash flow alongside collecting from existing customers. And of course, through this crisis, business is still going on. There's lots of work going on around supporting key workers and frontline staff. So where we're all providing services and products, then continue to do so, but obviously be mindful of the ability to collect on those.
What's your view in terms of, one of the things we've struggled advising our members is, it appears on the surface the government loan scheme is very generous, 12 months interest-free of a loan to support your business. But yeah, I struggle with that a little bit in that you can only really borrow money if you know when you're going to be able to pay it back. And not knowing how long this crisis is going to go on for or what the economic situation looks like for afterwards, how should entrepreneurs, take on more debt with such uncertainty in the future about how you could ever repay it?
Yeah. And I think that the challenge with some of the government schemes, I think, what they've done is pretty impressive. Unfortunately, a lot of the finer detail about the schemes that are available are just not quite there. The furlough scheme is a perfect example. It's announced, it's a great opportunity. However, detail unravels as you go. I think that's the same for the loan schemes. That doesn't help people short term. I think the advice has got to be, take what opportunities are there and available. I don't believe any of the debt or loan opportunities that are being provided from the government have any security against them. There is no interest on them. I think this is the government putting schemes in place to keep people going as long as possible. So my advice was, yes, look at the fine detail. And if panelists want to get in touch with any help, absolutely happy to help. But take advantage of sources of capital that are available, especially if there is no security against it and there's no interest attached.
Okay, and just for clarity on the government loan scheme, for loans up to 100,000, there's no security. Between 100 and 250,000, they'll want a fixed and floating debenture of the assets of the business. And beyond 250,000, they're looking for director guarantees. So there's some levels of recourse, but yeah, much lighter than the normal circumstances.
Yes, and I think they, take advantage of the ones that have got the least attachments to them, obviously.
Great, thanks. Tim, a question for you from Jim May. It says, Tim, it seems to me that corporate reputations will be massively influenced by behaviour in this crisis to all stakeholders. We're seeing both great and appalling examples already. Can you comment, please? Yeah,
hi, Jim. I would agree with it. I think, although it's probably sexist now, but cometh the moment, cometh the man was an very old-fashioned phrase, and I think, that is still relevant. I think this is a time where we can show our real mettle, where we can show what we're made of. There is sometimes in the wee small hours you do think, I can't cope. This is gonna kill us. Let's shut everything down. And then I think there will be times when you wake up, in as dawn comes through the window, and then we can see that actually, things aren't too bad. And I think how we communicate with our clients, how we work with them. I have an example from just 2 days ago. We have a smaller client, and one of my colleagues approached him and said, look, there's nothing we can do for you for the next 2 or 3 months. So we're not going to invoice you for any work. And he was adamant, the client was adamant that no, it was the right thing to do to keep paying his suppliers. He wanted us to get through unscathed. And I just thought it's little things like that that go such a long way. And I know that I will forever be grateful to this person. At the other extreme, we have a very large corporate who, if this company decided that they wanted to, I suppose, effectively furlough us, just put us into the long grass while they got their house in order, and when they were able to do business again, that would have a real impact on us. Well, they've decided not to. They've sent us a letter saying that no, it's all systems go. We know you can't do very much for us at the moment, but it is business as usual. You'll owe us a few hours when we bounce back up, but please carry on. And so it is these statements, these acts of generosity that I think we will all remember, and I think we're all capable of doing. In turn, we will have suppliers. So for example, my offices, I've got there's a cleaning team that come in. Well, I've said to them, look, I know you can't come in at the moment, but I will still pay you. And then down to the really basic stuff, like my piano teacher, one of my many midlife crises is learning piano. And the piano teacher has said, well, look, don't worry, I won't be able to see you. And I said, well, have you thought about Zoom lessons? And she's gone into that. And so she's now secured something like 80% of her client base are now doing piano lessons via Zoom. So I think Jim's point about, is this the time when we can show what we're made of? I would say absolutely it is.
And you think people will have long memories?
Oh, don't we all have long memories? I remember some of the slights that I received when I first started up in business 25 years ago. I remember when I worked in Fleet Street, which for the younger members of our webinar audience is where all the national media used to be based. So that was my first career as a journalist. And I remember receiving a letter from a national newspaper editor offering me a job, which I turned down because it wasn't for me. He said, you will never, ever work in Fleet Street again. So the first thing I did when I got a job on a rival newspaper was to send him a letter on letter-headed paper, of course, from his rival, saying that I'm very pleased to say that his prediction was wrong. So yeah, I think we have amazingly long memories for good and not so good incidents.
Great, thanks for that. And Peter, one of the things, thinking back to our time together at eCourier, I remember kind of in the depths of the, when it was at its worst, you and I sat down and thought we had maybe a 10% chance of survival. And then I remember, many months later when we came out the other side, again, we went for a beer. There was a bit of a theme there. But one of the things that I remember you said to me that really stuck in my mind is that the reason we survived it was it wasn't just what we did, it was the order we did it in, and choosing what to care about on any given day through that, those crazy days of crisis mode is really important. I think we just guessed, or certainly I think I just guessed, but how do you know what to focus on as you go through the different stages of a crisis?
Well, that's a good and tough question. I can partly answer that. I have the benefit of being trained to managing crises. Obviously, the last thing the airline industry wants to do is to hurt anyone. So we spend an extraordinary amount of time, hopefully the travelling public realise that, but probably not to the extent in which we understand and practice issues in crisis management to make sure we don't hurt anyone, and if we do, we respond accordingly. I think the order of priority, my answer is partly into the previous comment, and that was look, not see. Let me give you an anecdote. I remember many years ago as a young man, I was flying some live lobsters from Glasgow to Gatwick. And for those of you who don't know, lobsters, they were crated and banded, but they're quite cannibalistic. And 500 kilos of live lobsters behind you is quite disconcerting. They know what their fate is. These were on their way to Paris. But importantly, seriously, I had to land at Manchester, and there was a massive storm. And therefore, I was landing pure on instruments. So I was just reading the instrument panel in front of me. And there are 7 key basic instruments that you have to use to make sure that you don't lose your orientation. It takes, for a non-qualified pilot in instrument flight conditions, it takes about 2 minutes to lose where you are, and inevitably you die at the end of it. And I was seeing the instrument panel, but not looking. And I just froze. My brain suddenly froze, and I had the remembrance to contact air traffic control, and I said, whatever the code said, Golf Hotel, I've lost the picture. That was the exact phrase I used. And the ATT guy knew exactly what I meant. And he just very slowly went through, what is your altitude? What is your speed? What is your position relative? And then he forced me to look at the instrumentation. So I was at 2,000 feet, barometric pressure was this, my speed was 140 knots. And slowly I came back to, within 30 seconds, I'd regained that picture. I could now see what I was looking at. Or looking at what I can see. So I think the order of priority becomes, as you say, critical. It's difficult to answer that. I think certainly you've got an element of business logic. Each and every person listening to this and watching this webinar know their own business. So therefore, they can deduce themselves what is critical. And I think either Tim or Gary certainly mentioned that in terms of levels of priority. It comes naturally to many people in terms of understanding that logic. But I think what you have to do is to just really concentrate, write it down as a checklist, and make sure you've covered all your points. Discuss it with your colleagues and with your family or your advisors, so that you can muster a sensible approach. But there is a certain logic and order. But clearly, in times when you're not having any income coming in, liquidity and how you're going to resolve that problem, the balance sheet and the cash flow statement becomes top of mind. There's no point fracking around if there's no business at the end of it. But I think there's a certain logic and order which for most people will come naturally in terms of the relevance of their own business. But for me, it's making sure that I understand what those key performance indicators are and which ones are critical and which ones are not critical, and concentrate on the priority ones.
Yeah, great visualization, I think, of that dashboard of the business. Gary, a question here from Clive Bonney. You might want to answer, or Duck, depending on your view. But it says, what are your views, Remos, all insurance who took money for policies to cover business interruption but are now refusing to pay?
I don't think you want me to comment. Because of what I might say. So I think that sort of answers the question. I'm not dodging it, but yes, I will refrain from using the phrases I would like to use.
Okay, well then we move on to
I sound like a lawyer.
Yeah, a question for Usma for you as well. It says, my question is about startups like mine, where generating cash flow is one of the biggest challenges. My question is to Gary is to advise startups about how to generate cash flow at a time of crisis.
Yeah. A couple of angles. I think one is in terms of what your product or services you're selling. Is the market still there? If it is, then really understand who wants your product, who wants your service, and continue as is. I think someone asked a little bit earlier, does it look like you're profiteering from the situation? No, you're not. This is your fundamental basics of your business. And if those services or products are needed to support key workers, then absolutely continue. I think the other source of generating cash flow is through these government schemes, the largest one being furlough. If you have quite a few workers, and back to Peter's point, I think I mentioned it earlier, about the critical path, focus on the critical things. That seems quite brutal, but if they're non-critical things, then use the government scheme to put people into furlough. That will help you with cash through this difficult period.
Okay.
Nigel, could I make a comment?
Please, yeah.
Thank you. I think there are, as Gary said, I think there are opportunities in the midst of this storm, and I don't think it's being particularly ghoulish either. So as an example, we offer communication support to one or two privatised utilities. Now, one is active at the moment, the other one isn't active, we're doing nothing. So I've approached their head of comms to say, look, if you're furloughing members of your team, or if you've got high sickness levels, we're still here. Now, not everyone will think, oh, that's a good thing to. They'll think, I'm not sure that's for me. But I feel I have to do that. I have to take every opportunity that could present itself, and who knows what's going to happen to my health. So while I have my health, while the key members of my team have their health, then we're here, we're open for business, and we can perhaps jump in and help on an interim basis for a day, a week, a month. Thank you.
Great, and actually that kind of leads into, I'm going to tie up two questions here from two of our Croydon members, David and Nigel, which is really the same thing. Is, what's your view, and I don't know who wants to take this, what's your view on selling and marketing, at a time of crisis? Are you kind of wasting your money, or is it the perfect opportunity to double up?
Okay, I'll jump in and maybe we can do it collectively. I think just be very clear about what it is you're selling in the current environment. I think we all have lots of great ideas, but we've really got to understand whether the market is there. If the market is there and it is supporting you through a difficult period, and it is supporting businesses that are either running as business as usual or are supporting key workers like the NHS, then absolutely yes. I think that is, the shape of business is going to change to some degree, and what we do today will be very different tomorrow. So I think exploiting those opportunities, and exploiting is the wrong word, using those opportunities now, absolutely yes. If that means a little bit of investment to tap into that potential, why would we not?
I agree wholeheartedly with that. After the 2007-8-9 recession, where I saw a lot of the sectors I worked in fall off a cliff, I headed very much for the public sector, and we felt this was a kind of a safe port to be in. And that has borne us through to the current day. And so I have probably about 60% of my business is public sector. They are busier than ever. And to some extent, they're actually struggling to keep up with the demand for their services. So typically, I was working with one council this morning where they're providing all the food parcels for vulnerable people. They've decided that that's their job. They've got to really crack on with it. So I think there are opportunities that still exist in these very difficult times, and it's perhaps a little bit of lateral thinking, and I think there is absolutely no shame or guilt in looking for those extra markets to see if there's something in it for you.
I think, Nigel, there's two things. I think one is that indeed looking for additional market opportunities is just a natural way in which we think. But I think also this gives us an opportunity. Theodore Levitt, a famous marketing guru, said that the reason why the American railroad system failed in the 50s was because they thought they were in the business of running trains as opposed to moving people. And that's why they lost out and didn't take any advantage of the then increase in opportunity to fly, particularly with the advent of the jet aircraft. So I think this is a time when people can look to see other opportunities, just part of their natural business processing. But equally, I think, given that these conditions are traumatic and that we have to, as managers, owners, whatever, see our way through, that's our job. We have to facilitate and deal with all crises. Then I think there's an opportunity to learn from yourself in terms of how you've handled yourself during this crisis. I think there's a lot of people will suddenly realise when they look back and see what they've done over the last few weeks and hopefully not too many months, and realise, my goodness, did I do that? So I think equally it's an opportunity to learn intuitively what you can do as a manager. And not, one of the last things I advocate is to read anything from a management book, but there's a lot of it within the people, and I think there's two things that we can gain out of this, which is not taking market advantage, but certainly making sure that when you come out at the end of it, you're a better person and a better manager.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I think there was a feeling some people were worried about being seen to kind of profiteer, in a crisis or take advantage. But I'm just going to read a message on the chat there from Robert Leaves that says, as a manager in health and social care, I can't stress enough how critical PPE is at the moment. And thank you to any business online who's helping assist with this. So Robert, thank you and your colleagues for what you're doing. But it does show, there is demand there. And, it is about pulling together and going out to market and find new customers is actually really important, because it could be helping the effort to defeat this virus. So thank you. Great. A question here from Helena. Tim, what's the best examples of brands and companies' behaviour that you've seen in terms of communication so far in this crisis?
Oh, now then. Oh gosh. What have I? I think. Well, I think you've seen. Dare I mention the government? I think some of the activities, some of the financial support they've brought out that Gary touched upon, and I would agree 100% with Gary, some of them perhaps they do need a little bit of further thinking. I think the government acted really, really quickly, and they brought this word furlough into the English language, really, when it's much more of an very common in America, but I'd never heard of it over here. I thought it was something to do with horse racing. I think the government, while not covered itself completely in glory because of the speed at which they rolled out some of these support packages, I think they've done not a bad job at all. The NHS, as ever, it's a strong brand. It is used to having a kicking from time to time. It never quite gets the funding that it believes it needs. But I think, gosh, don't we all now love the NHS? I'm sure all of you, majority of you, 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night, tonight in fact, will be on your doorstep, clapping away for the NHS workers, the key workers, all of the people who are working so hard to keep our daily routine alive. So I fear I've slightly fudged the question there, Nigel, but I hope that gives some kind of relevance to the answer.
Yeah, and if I just add to what you've said, Tim, I mean, you've focused on the NHS, completely agree, on the government. I think if I were to pick out an example of what I've seen in the private sector, and forgive me if I offend anyone, I never thought I'd say this, the way in which some of the large banks have behaved, and I've seen this through experiences of colleagues from previous companies, different sectors, where they've effectively come out and put their staff on furlough and they're topping up salaries. Not only are they doing that, they're actually, where they have contractors working for them providing critical services, they've extended that to those companies as well. And I think, the banks got a lot of bad press, which was quite correct. To see them behaving in this way through a crisis of this nature to try and help us get through to the other side has been quite impressive, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think maybe the other one I'd throw in there is the major food retailers. I think they've been very clear. I think there's been a lot of communication I think they've prioritised both in terms of products and in terms of customers, and they've been kept a really cool head when the whole country was running out of toilet roll, and just reassured us that it would come back, and it has. So I think there's a lot of very calm leadership from some of those, from Sainsbury's and Tesco, I think in particular. Okay. One more question here for the group from Anne Fay, basically saying we've seen some businesses basically euthanizing themselves and just saying the future looks too difficult and cutting and running rather than fighting through for the future. Do you think the government's doing enough to stop companies doing that?
I don't know the answer to that question. Perhaps Gary may be in a more effective position to answer that. But I think from an airline point of view, there's massive talk at the present moment globally in terms of should airlines be allowed to survive, should they get bailouts. Branson hasn't come out too bright in all this at the present moment. Willie Walsh is advocating that airlines should stand on their own 2 feet. I suppose if you're cruel and ruthless, there is an argument that the companies that deserve to survive will survive, and those that won't will disappear. Certainly that's relevant in the airline business, and I'm not quite sure if that's the right approach. The government will obviously have a different answer, but I think it's going to be exceptionally tough from the liquidity point of view. I mean, if there's no money there and the government can't provide enough cash, I mean, they can write so much and print so much money, but there has to be a finite end to that, then inevitably, I suppose one has to be realistic. But I think you need to generate huge amounts of faith in yourself and with your colleagues and with your customers to see a way through. There has to be, at the end of the day, a way through. But I guess a lot won't have that opportunity. They'll sever their connections sooner rather than later. We can't. Everyone can't be saved. That's the nature of this crisis, particularly. There are going to be substantial losers at the end of it. Aside from the human misery, obviously that's not really notwithstanding that. But from a company point of view, I'm afraid, a lot will go to the wall.
Yeah.
I think just to follow on from that, what the government have done this time around is unprecedented. Now, we know the situation is unprecedented, but the amount of money invested into furlough, into deferring business rates, into providing access to short-term financing is significant. So is it enough? I suppose it will never be enough because of the scale of what we're going through. So therefore, I think, as Peter says, some businesses will struggle. It may be that actually a practical decision for some businesses where the market for their product and services is just not there in the short term. Well, rather than shutting down forever, does it make more sense from a liquidity point of view just to take a stop and then rethink how to come back later, rather than to try and limp through a very difficult situation and put the longer term of the business at risk? I would say exhaust the options available from the government, but where they're not enough, because simply the demand for that product and service is not available, it may be that a short-term decision to shut is the right.
Okay. I'm going to try and see if we can get the technology to work here. Helen Jevons, who's our sales and marketing manager in Sussex Innovation, wants to jump in and talk a little bit about, I guess, what we're finding when we talk to our members. I don't know if that's worked. There we are.
Hold on.
Maybe just see what we're finding on the front line, Helena.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you. I think I've been getting a lot of comments and emails from people who've already left, actually, saying how useful they found it. So thank you ever so much, because, why we wanted you here and why we wanted to offer this to our clients is because, everything is just changing so fast and everybody's trying to navigate territory that they're not used to. And we're doing our best to try and find out as much as possible about what people need at this time and offer people what it is that will really serve them. So I just wanted to jump on really at Nigel's invitation and say, thanks ever so much, because we're already getting a lot of feedback about how useful this has been in terms of focusing people on those things, in terms of being able to get the visibility back on that dashboard when you're panicking with the plane, and how to see things clearly. And I suppose I just wanted to jump on at the end really and say, we're here for whatever your needs are at this time. You know, we're in the very fortunate position that we have got some EU funded packages of resource that we can use to support companies in this area at the time. And it's such an extraordinary position to be in, that we can offer that service to our membership to do whatever they need. So please do get in touch with us if you think we can help you in any way at that moment. You know, whatever your business is, whether it is how to communicate with people effectively, whether it is, you know, how to just have a couple of people around you while you look at that dashboard, whether that is, you know, something else entirely, how to effect a quick pivot. We've got another webinar next week on if you need to be doing that quick pivot from serving a business to business market to suddenly taking your model into direct to consumer. How can we support you in doing that? But please, my ask is, keep talking to us about what you need. We decided at the end of this webinar that what we wanted to do and what we wanted to offer people was the opportunity to just drop us a note if they're interested in accessing that funding. We've actually set up a specific package which we're calling the Survive and Thrive Task Force, where 3 of our team will come and sit with you and work through whatever your most difficult, complicated business issue is at the moment. So if you're interested in that, I think I'll work out the technology now and see if I can drop you a link as to how you can do that. If you want to continue the dialogue about a particular crisis issue, about if you want to pursue the theme about how to communicate, or if you've got another business need, please do take the opportunity to join us and sign up for one of those task forces, and keep telling us what you need, because we're here to serve you at this time with what those needs are. So that was just what I wanted to jump on and say, as well as to say thank you to all you guys for joining us for our first seminar.
Excellent. Thanks, Helena. So yeah, so I think there'll be a link going into the chat box from somebody very shortly. If any of the attendees want to follow up with us, or obviously just jump on our website at Sussex Innovation. So we have the best part of 30 business advisors there to help navigate through this. So we've just marginally run over time, so I will wrap it up. I want to say obviously a huge thank you to Peter, to Gary, and to Tim. I'm not sure how virtual applause works, and if we're in a room we would do that, but I can't even hear that. So we'll assume a round of applause from everybody. Your insight and your vision has been fantastic, and I think we'll really help a lot. We're getting lots of very nice comments in the chat box, so really like to thank you all for that, and really appreciate your time, and good luck, and I hope you all stay fit and healthy more than anything, and hopefully in business too.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.